So in that question, I'm going to first of all share with you what I'd sent you some times back on the rules that you're going to follow when it comes to the crashing of the activities. So number one, we need to understand that when we are crashing the activities, not all activities that are supposed to be crashed. We only reduce the duration. What we mean by crashing is the reduction of the duration of the activities so that we can complete our project. We can complete our project within a minimal period of time, but again, not compromising, for example, on the quality and the way we would want our project at the end of the day to be like. So when we are considering the crashing of the activities, we only crash or we reduce the duration of what we call the critical activities. And my take is that all of us, we understand what we mean by critical activities. These are those activities that when we are drawing the network, we realize that they are the ones giving us the critical path. So these are the activities which we are going to do the crashing upon. And so we must identify among the various activities in the project, which one do we call critical? So the first thing that you're supposed to do is to actually draw the network diagram so that you're able to understand or identify which are the activities you're going to call critical activities, okay? So the first thing you do, you draw the network diagram. The number two, you have identified the critical path, giving you the idea on which are these activities you're going to call critical. So the number one in our guidelines is that we only crash the critical activities. And I've said, for you to know which are the critical activities, you must draw the network diagram. Number two, an activity is only crashed upon what we call the crashable time. Crashable time means the time to which you can consider to reduce the duration of an activity. And so to get the crashable time, or to know by how many days, by how many weeks, or by how many months should I reduce my activity's duration, the crashable time is given by the normal time minus the crash time. How will I know that the question I'm dealing with is on the crashing? You must see the following words: crash, normal, or the expected time. And definitely the question falls under the crashing of the activities. So you take the normal time minus the crash time. And in a question where you have the part method, you will not be given, say, the normal time. You have the optimistic, the pessimistic, and the most likely time, like the example I had given you yesterday. Since you don't have the normal time, you must compute what we call the expected time. We have the formula to follow. And now your expected time is the one you're going to treat as the normal time. So if this were a part method, you'd actually have the crashable time be given by the expected time. So you replace your normal time here with the expected time, and then you minus the crash time. Then, after you have noted the crashable times for all the activities, whether critical or non-critical, and I repeat, you are computing the crashable times for all the activities in the project, whether they are critical or non-critical. You now start considering, before you crash, what will be the effect of my crashing of the activity? By how much will the project's duration, for example, have reduced, but in return, the cost is likely to change. So we must tell how much would be that additional cost. The additional cost per an activity, per a given unit of the duration. For example, if your time is given in terms of week, you're computing the cost now per week. If it is in days, you're computing the cost per day for that one particular activity. So you must understand what are you going to define as your cost slope, or rather the additional cost per week, per day, or per month, for example, of you crashing that activity. And we also call it the incremental cost. You may also be given extra cost, for example, per a given unit of the duration. For example, you may hear from a question, you're given the cost per day, extra cost per week, and so on. So this is what we call the cost slope. However, in some cases, the cost slope may not be given. So what are you supposed to do? I've said a question that is to deal with the crashing. You'll have to hear of the words normal or expected or the crash. And to compute the cost slope, or what I'm calling the additional cost of crashing or the extra cost, you take your crash cost. There's a column that you'll have been given as the crash cost. You take that crash cost, and remember we are dealing with per an activity. You minus the normal cost, and then we divide this one by whatever you'll have computed earlier as your crashable time. And now to do the crashing, you'll start by crashing an activity whose cost slope is the lowest in a given project. And I repeat, you follow what we call the ascending order when you're crashing the activities, because you don't want your project, at the end of the day, you have reduced the period, but now the cost is actually going to be very high. So you avoid that by, first of all, evaluating such activities whose implications when you are crashing the activities, that their costs, which is the additional now, is not going to have increased the total cost at the end of the day so much. Now, when you are considering, now you have taken your crashable time, you have taken the cost slope, and remember the guide is always by the original critical path. The activities you had already identified in that original critical path will be guiding you throughout. You now start evaluating the activities which you are crashing, and remember we are doing it in ascending order. And the moment you start crashing, remember there has to be an effect of that particular crash on your project. So you crash an activity, evaluate what has happened to the project by looking at the effect of that crashing on all the parts, especially where that activity will be involved. At no point should you actually let your original critical path be overtaken when you're doing the crashing of the activities. All the times, remember to maintain the critical path which you had said it's original as your critical path in your project. However, you might have crashed an activity, have done the revision of the effect of that crashing on the project, but now you realize when you have crashed that activity, another path has emerged to be critical. I repeat, you have crashed an activity. Along the way, after you have revised your paths, now another path has emerged to be critical. How do you tell that another path has emerged to be critical? After you have done the crashing, you have revised your original path, there's another path that is likely to share that amount of time as to the original critical path. And so you'll be having more than one critical path. in such a case, what do? You must consider to crash activities simultaneously. There's an activity you're going to crash in your original path, and you now crash it together with another activity, but in our now emerging new critical path. I repeat, simultaneous crashing happens when you're crashing an activity in your original path that you had called critical, and because there's another critical path that has emerged, you also pick an activity in that path to do the crashing. So you're crashing more than one activity at the same time. That is what we call simultaneous crashing. Again, when you're crashing the activities, one thing that you should always avoid, and I repeat, never crash more than one activity in the same path. You are crashing one at a time in each and every path, but you can consider to crash one activity plus another if they do fall in different paths. And the moment you're done with the crashing, make sure that you're going to revise your critical path, revise your duration of the project, and more importantly, you draw the final network diagram. And why were we crashing? We wanted to reduce the duration of the overall completion time of the project. So you must analyze what has happened to the cost at the end of the day. So you do what we call the trade-off between the cost and the time in that particular project. So when we are crashing the activities, those are the various elements that one should always consider when we are crashing the activities. Class, I would want to hear whether we have understood our guidelines when we are crashing the activities. Is it okay? So that we can now start our example. Any point that is not clear, because when we'll be crashing, we would want to understand why pick activity A and maybe not B, that at the end of the day, we will have crashed the activities which are supposed to be crashed in the project. Is that clear?
Yes.
We are okay on that, yeah? Okay, good. So I'm now picking our example, the December 2014, question number 3B. We first of all drew the network diagram. We drew the network diagram. And remember, I've said as many times as possible, go through the project before you start the crashing, the network diagram. So we understand from the question, there are some activities given there, activities A all the way to H, where activity A and B starts the project. Activities A and B, you can see they are becoming predecessors of quite a number of activities there in the project. And at some point, activity C and D have to come together as we draw our network diagram, as we mark the beginning of activity known as G. So when we are networking, you are thinking of what? What happened? What is about to happen? In line with what are my predecessors and what will be the successors of those activities. If an activity doesn't have a successor, remember, you push it to the end of the project. So let's draw the network diagram first. Activity A marks the beginning of our project. And at this point, I'm hoping that all of us, we are now comfortable in terms of how we draw the network diagram. So whenever we start on an activity, remember we must mark the beginning. So we have a note there to mark the beginning of activity A. We can draw our activity there with that arrow. Then we also have activity B here. The two are marking the beginning of the project. And every time you complete an activity, again, you must mark its end by having a node. Can mark this one as our number 2. Can call this one our number 3. Then activity A becomes the predecessor of activity C. We have activity C there. Activity B becomes the predecessor of activity D. Why I've picked this? It's because they are going to become predecessors of some activity, like we see activity G. So because they were not starting at the same point, it's okay that they end at the same point. But if they had started at the same point, you must have considered to introduce a dummy. But this case, we don't need a dummy since the activity C and D were not starting at the same point. So we can call this one node number 4. Then we also have activity E. E has got no successor. So we can push this one to the end. Can push this one to the end of the project. We have activity E there. Then activity C, D were to give rise to activity G. Again, no successor. We push it to the end of the project. Then we also have activity F, whose successor is activity H. This is activity F. We draw a node to mark its end. And then we have activity H. You can push it to the end of the project as we mark the end of our project there with the activities G, E, and now H. Can call this one node number 5. Remember, they have to be logical. The sequence and logical way of arranging your activities in the project. And as we mark the end, we can call the end point number 6 or event number 6. So activity A had a period of how long? This was 5. This was 4. Activity C has 2 weeks, 1 for D. Activity E, we have 5. Activity F, again, we have 5. Activity G, we have 4. And activity H, we have 3. Okay. Our project is not complete. We have to mark the start of the event, of the activities with the given ET and the retest event times. So at the beginning, we have not consumed any amount of time. Time is always 0. We work forward. I'm using the forward pass as we fill in the earliest event times of all the nodes. If there is only one arrow, we say there is no comparison. So here I'll take 0 and 5. I'll have a total of 5. I'm not making any comparison there. The same alongside activity B, 0 and 4, we'll have a period of time equivalent to 4. However, looking at node number 4, we have to do the comparison along the 2 routes. So we pick the highest value. Here I have 5 and 2, that will make 7. Here I have 4 and 1, 5 and 7. 7 is the larger value. I'll go and pick that value. Then we also have point number 6 will require number 5. So we work on number 5 first. And it has only one arrow directing towards number 5. So I'm going to pick 4 and 5. This will give us 9. No comparison is required there. And now we compare on node number 6, the 3 roots. 7 and 4, that will make 11. 4 and 5, that will make 9. And 9 and 3, 12 is the largest value. We pick that. And you can see we have already marked the project's completion time, and being the earliest event time marking the end of the project, we also have it as our retest event time for that event marking the end of the project. So when we take the latest event time of the last node in the project, it is now possible to come back and we fill in the retest event times of all these other events in the project. So now we are working backward. We are using the backward pass. So here we have 12 and 3. That will give us 9. No comparison is required there. Here again, we have only one arrow coming from point number 4, coming from, remember, we are working backwards. 12 and 4, this will give us 8 as our retest event time. Then on node number 4, we'll have to do a comparison. Here we have 3 directions. So we take 9 and 5, that will give us 4. 12 and 5, that will give us 7. Then 8 and 1 will give us 7. 7, 7, and 4. We are picking the smallest value. 4 will be our retest event time of number 3. Then number 2, we have got no comparison to make. 8 minus 2, we take 6. And now we do a comparison on node number 1 with the 2 roots here. The 2 arrows coming from point number 1. We move backwards again as we do the comparison. We pick the smaller value. 6 and 5 will give us 1. 4 and 4 will give us 0. 0 is the smaller figure. And we said if you don't get 0 here, something is not okay. It is important you go back and correct your work. We mark now our critical path, as you can see, alongside all the nodes whose latest and the earliest event times are the same. We have our critical path for the project. So we have path B, F, H. And it is important when you're evaluating because, for example, like in our case here, you see along the path B, E, you still have the earliest and the latest event times being the same. So one might mistake and take the path BE to be critical. But remember, you are considering the time for the project. So if you are to take, for example, 4 and 5, that will give us 9, which doesn't actually give us the total period. which we require to complete our project. So we are taking path B, F, H to be the critical with an amount of time which we had already noted to be 12 weeks in that particular project. So you already have your critical path, and it is important to note that critical path once you have identified it in your project. So our critical path is path, the critical path for our project is path B, F, H. With how long? With 12 weeks being the project's completion time. So class, so far, are we clear on our project?
Yes.
The network diagram is clear?
Yes.
Yes.
Good. And my take is that you can always draw a correct network diagram, because without this, you will not be able to do the crashing. So throughout our crashing, these are the activities. You can see what I'm considering. Yeah, the activities B, F, and H. These are the only activities that are going to guide us when we'll be doing our crashing of the activities. But I've said, let's say they'll emerge another to be critical, we'll also consider to do simultaneous activities. So what will be the project's completion time? We have noted it's 12. But we want now to reduce this 12 weeks to some another maybe time period, let's say 10 or whichever time would be at the end of the day, and that is what we now call the crashing. Okay? Now, once we have noted the period of the project, it is important to also indicate what to be the project cost. And here I'm talking of the normal cost. So this project will be associated with a cost of, class, you can see on our question, there's a column known as normal cost. So what you're supposed to do to define the cost of the project is to sum over all those costs for all the activities in the project, and that total becomes the project total cost. And I've said you only pick the column called normal cost. So in our case, we already have a total of 3,400,000 shillings being the cost associated with all the activities in the project. In our next page, there's some additional information. The crash periods provided rates to the least possible period each activity can take, and you're going to take care of that crash time. Number 2 is my point. In addition to the above cost, in addition to what? The normal cost given under the normal column in our table, the project incurs administration overheads of shillings 400,000 every week. So our total cost for the project, and this is what I'm going to call the normal, the associated normal cost. If a project were to run for the whole 12 weeks, what would be the total cost? This will be given by shillings 3,400,000. We are going to hold the zeros, and then we have to add whatever we are calling the overhead cost. So for 12 weeks, each week we are incurring an amount of shillings 400,000. So again, we hold the zeros. And now our total cost, that is the normal total cost associated with the project, will be equivalent to, we have 12 by 4.
48.
12 by 4 will give us what?
48.
4,800,000, something like that. Then
Yes.
add it to 3,400,000. That will give us 48 and 32.
8,200.
This will be 200.
8,000.
8,200.
Figures are in thousands, so we have 8,200,000 as our associated number cost. So this is important to know because we want to see the implication on our project. After we have crashed the activity, we want to see what will happen when we crash an activity, the effect of that on the total cost of the project. So that is the first thing we need to do. But because we require to know all the other parts when we are crashing the activities, let's identify these other parts. For one, we already have the critical, but we also need the other parts. So we have path A. A path we said is a route that one can follow from the beginning of the project to the end of it. We have activity A, C, G as one of the paths. How long will this take last? This is 7 and 4. This
11.
11 weeks. Another path, you can see path E, D,
E, G.
G. How long is this? 9.
9.
9 weeks. Another path in the project,
B, E.
we have path BE. How long?
9.
We have 4 and 5, 9.
9.
And lastly, we have our original critical path in our project, the period of 12. So the other way you could have, for example, identified your critical path is to identify all the paths in the project, and then you put that path which has the longest duration as your critical path. So if you have to do the comparison among the 4 paths, you actually have picked which path, the path BFH as your critical path. And you have seen the associated cost of the project is at 2,200,000 shillings. Okay, that is the first step. Our next item now is the computation. We do the computations of the crushable times. We do the calculations of the